Good evening. I'm Eve, filling in for Hattie. On tonight's episode, Mauro Biello and the Canadian men's national team are humbled by the Samurai Blue, and we give our very last MLS playoff thoughts. All that and more on episode 151 of The Ball is Round. And super happy to be joined by my co-host Elias Gregoriadis. How are you on this fallish
Doing
Monday
good.
evening? Good?
It was a really nice day up until recently when it started raining. So I'm doing all right. It was good to
Yeah.
get out of the house and not think about soccer
Mhm.
for.
Oh no, I didn't know that was a setting we have here on The Ball is Round, needing to not think about
Well,
soccer.
just for a little bit. It's good to decompress
Fair enough.
sometimes, you know.
Yes, it's good to have some variety. I will give you that. Awesome. So, of course, we are a duo tonight because Hattie is still away, but no big deal because, as always, the world of soccer delivered. So, I hope you are ready to return to business as usual and think about soccer for a bit and talk about it with
Well, I
me.
mean, we have to talk about that
We
Canada
have to.
Japan game, which means it's business as usual,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yep. So, will we rip off the band aid?
Might as well let's get it over with.
Might as well. So, obviously, last no, it was Tuesday of last week when we spoke, and we were pretty. I thought we tempered our expectations pretty appropriately for this match. I thought really it was. We understood that Canada and Japan were in two different places. When it comes to where they're established in their footballing development.
Yeah.
And it was going to be an away game on the other side of the planet. And so anyway, I think, though, they still managed to not live up to our expectations, to say the least. So let's take a look first and foremost at the lineup that Mauro Biello put out in his first game at the helm as the interim manager for the Canadian men's national team following John Herdman's departure. Elias, I'm willing to bet you had some thoughts when this came out. So let's take a look at it. And I'll just so we had Milan Borjan in net with a back three of Alistair Johnston, Kamal Miller, and Derek Cornelius. We had Sam Piet and Ishmael Kone as the Quebecois midfield tandem. Then we also had Jonathan Osorio playing in the number 10 role. We had Alfonso Davies and Richie Larea on the wings. And up top, there was Jonathan David and Kyle Laren. So you saw this come out, and what did you think after your impassioned speech last Tuesday?
Well, because the main thing that we talked about, right, was we're not expecting a giant revolution from Biello, at least not at the start. We just want to
Mm-hmm.
see a different kind of Canada, right? From the
Mm-hmm.
players, from the staff, from the preparation, from
Mm-hmm.
just an overall product to show that they've grown from the past two tournaments. And I mean, it took us 3 minutes to realize that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah,
So it was
exactly.
that first hour in general was just kind of a bit of a gut punch. I think
Mm-hmm.
going
Mm-hmm.
into Japan, like you said, with the time zone difference, with the fact that a lot of these players are both at end, like every team, every one of these players is either end or early season in their
Mm-hmm.
development. Whereas a lot of the Japanese players play a relatively similar schedule. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of the Canadian players, if you're in MLS or if you're in Europe or if you're in anywhere else that plays that starts the season in September versus ends the season in September, October, it just is a whole lot of different um
Kind of
states that the
mentalities.
players are
Yeah.
arriving in. And then you're doing that 12 hours away, or was it
Mm-hmm.
11, 12 hours away,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
against a
Not
team that is, one of the most informed national teams out there right now. So
exactly.
yeah, I think going into this, I wasn't too excited. I did not
For
end
sure.
up waking up in time. I woke up at
Okay, so
halftime,
you
so I
okay,
watched the first half. I stayed off Twitter. I watched the first half, and I saw the first goal, and I immediately went on Twitter. And I said, "Okay, I've seen it.
and then you
Got
realized how bad it was.
exactly."
Um,
So,
yeah,
but overall, it was the display that was disappointing, right? The tactics
for
were
sure.
relatively the same, and we weren't going to be too surprised by that. It was just
Mhm.
I had hoped to see at least some different kind of energy that wasn't there.
Mhm. And I think definitely, oh, actually, before I launch into my train of thought, first and foremost, just say hi to Matthew.
Hello,
Good
Matthew.
evening. And of course, good evening as well to Robbie. I think definitely for Canada, the loss of Steve Eustachio, it was announced, I think a few days prior to the game that he would not be part of the camp because he had picked up an injury in Portugal with his club, and it was decided that it was best for him to stay and rehab there. I think that was a massive blow for this team, losing his engine in midfield. I definitely don't think that helped, and I think he is a huge, huge, huge part of any success Canada is going to have, whether it's if they make Copa America in 2024, Gold Cup 2025, or World Cup 2026. So I think that he was a tremendous loss to the side. I was expecting an impassioned rant from you about the presence of Milan Borjan and net, but lo and behold,
We
I
went
see.
over that last week. I'm not gonna.
Okay, then we
And
will
I gave
read
that
it
rant in my room at like 7 a.m. On Saturday anyway, or on Sunday. I forget what day it was, but
Friday,
um
actually.
Friday. Yeah, it was so early in the morning. I don't even remember what day it was. But yeah,
Oh boy.
I've made my feelings about that very clear. But
Okay, so yes,
yeah,
anyone who was curious and didn't catch our last episode, go ahead and listen to episode number 150 for Elias's impassioned thoughts on the changing of the guard. So let's take a look. Let's just dive into this match because, yeah, it was a nightmare start for Canada. Let's be clear. It basically could not have started worse than it did. In the second minute, Japan opened the scoring with their very first goal. Just for anyone who needs context, the final score of this match was 4-1 in favor of Japan. So in the second minute, there was a flurry of activity really in Canada's 18-yard box, most of which involved a Japanese player crossing the ball in, followed by a half-hearted attempt to clear the ball by a variety of Canadian players, including Sam Piet, including Alfonso Davies, and last but not least, Derek Cornelius. Cornelius's attempted clearance was intercepted just outside the 18-yard box by Tanaka, and his shot beat Milan Borjan, kind of at his near post, a little bit towards the center of the goal. Could you have asked for a worse start to this match, Elias?
just not only did they concede, but it's the way that you concede,
It
right? Where
was very
they had what,
haphazard.
like 4 or 5 chances to clear their lines, and every
Yeah.
single one of them was uh churish, is the nicest way I can put it. And the last
Mhm.
one from Derek Cornelius that kind of just rolled, right? You said intercepted, but it was more like
Yeah, it was more almost
gifted,
like a
right? It was
pass.
more like
Yeah.
presented, right? It was a
Okay.
perfect
Yeah.
layoff. And it's kind of just like, and then I still think I got deflected. I didn't really see the replay wasn't really too conclusive, but like
No, it wasn't super
Milan Born
helpful.
gets sent the wrong way. It looked like I don't know. I was
I don't
still
know, or I'm not sure if maybe he,
the entire
there
thing
were,
was just an entire
yeah,
dumpster fire.
it was
But yeah, I
honestly
genuinely
like,
considered going back to bed when the first goal went in, and just
I was
rewatching
gonna
the full
say,
game when I like was awake and present and
I
emotionally
think
stable enough to watch it. But no, I powered through and
you
finished it.
suffered. Well, I did it while I was
Exactly.
getting ready for work, so I was like trying to do my hair, and I was like, oh, for God's sake.
Great
Um,
mindset to start the day with.
yeah, exactly. I was just standing there waiting for my bus, scowling at my phone. Much like I did at the Women's World Cup. My neighbors, I think, probably think I'm really unpleasant. Yeah, anyway, it was a terrible start. Like they total disorganization in the defense, which is going to be a running theme for this match. It's just like I was deeply concerned, and I said I knew pretty much. I think that we were in for a rough night. We do have a comment from Robbie who says we really do have to move on from Borjan. I'm not gonna lie, given the fact that this was a friendly, and I'm spoilers for anyone who didn't watch, he did remain in the net for the whole match. I kind of wondered if, because this was like this match actually, like in Japan, it had a special name. It wasn't just like a regular friendly. It was like some kind of
Oh,
exhibition match. I looked it up and I couldn't make heads or tails of what it was, like if it was something charitable or whatnot. Um, so like it was like a super friendly, you know what I mean? And I was kind of expecting that maybe, especially given that we're
nothing
in a
super about that. What's going on?
okay, yes, okay, well, it was very much a friendly, very much a non-competitive match. How's that?
You could say that.
Uh, yeah. So I really did think that, Mauro Biello might try to, especially given that, and spoilers again, Canada will go into halftime at 3-0 down. And so, there's essentially no coming back from that, especially after the performance, which we're going to go into, heartbreaking detail by detail here. I kind of wondered if we would see that changing of the guard happen, but we didn't. And definitely be really curious to see what happens during Canada's next match, because that is a competitive match. And we'll talk about that once we've gone over the game. So in the 19th minute, Canada was handed a lifeline as a VAR intervention caused the referee to grant Canada a penalty after it was judged that the keeper, Keisuke Osako, had made contact with Alphonso Davies as he was running in on goal. Jonathan David stepped up to the spot and he shot straight down the middle, with the ball ending up being saved by the keeper's legs. This is not the first time that we've seen Canada have some hiccups from the penalty spot. Elias, does this cause you concern, or is this like a blip for you? It's just a friendly. What are your thoughts?
It's not enough of a sample size to cause legitimate concern. It's more of just really, really strong annoyance right now,
Okay.
because it's like after the Belgian game, everyone was like, Jonathan David takes the penalties fitted. Jonathan David is extremely clinical from the spot. Jonathan David should
Yeah.
have taken the penalty. And this one, the one spot you're not supposed to put a penalty is anywhere from the waist down in the middle, and that's exactly where he put
Mm-hmm.
it. And I audibly like I was the loudest groan I'd ever let, just because it was just why, because he
Yeah.
knows better, because he's a much better penalty taker than that. And if you're ever going to put it, down the middle, you at least put some height on it, so the exact thing that just happened doesn't happen. So the trailing legs of the goalie, if the goalie dives, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
just snag it. And I was just like, this
Yeah.
is penalty
Yeah.
101, right? This is not, and Jonathan David is by no means a rookie in that
No,
respect. So
certainly
that
not.
was more just annoying than like a genuine problem spot. If it happens again, then
Mm-hmm.
like, this is the second time that in a very big game against very strong opposition that Canada is given a way back into the game, and
Yeah.
they don't take it. So,
Mm-hmm.
granted, against Belgium, the run of play was very different, but it's still one of those things you look back on and go, "Oh yeah, the game is entirely different." And
Yeah.
if they score that penalty, because look, I mean, as annoying as the first 5 minutes were, they did manage to kind of recompose themselves, and they weren't necessarily dominating play, but they had definitely gotten a better grip on the overall run of
Mm-hmm.
play. And this penalty was like maybe a bit of a lifeline back into it, and they squandered that, and it was just, you could see just the all the air going out of everyone's lungs and the shoulders dropping. It's like, oh
Yeah, exactly. No,
boy.
I was gonna actually, that was gonna be my next question is, did you notice a change in body language? First after a calamitous goal followed by a missed penalty. And for me, I did sense that that was a, like you kind of said it really let the air out of their tires, and it was not the ideal body language that you would want to have in a
No.
competitive match, certainly.
And the big comparison between that and Belgium is that Canada was dominating play against Belgium, where they had
Yeah.
a lot more of the ball and a lot more of they were controlling the tempo. So you miss a penalty, it's not the end of the game, right? Canada, just
Hmm.
because they had gotten a bit of a better grip, does not mean that they were dominating play. They were still very much on the back foot for
Hmm.
the majority of that opening 20 minutes. It was just that they weren't as overall calamitous defensively as they were in the first
Yeah.
five. And this penalty was more of a gift than the one against Belgium. So this one, missing this one, more feels a lot more like this was our one chance. So
Oh,
that
a
was
little
why
bit.
you could see them just
Yeah.
so demoralized.
Yeah, it was overall, and we could also talk about the fact, like, with so much turmoil going on in this national team setup now, there's still the conflicts with the federation. Obviously, they're operating under an interim manager. There's so much upheaval, I guess, for one of a better word. I don't know how much that figures into our discussion of this performance, but um yeah. Anyway, it was basically a sign that I think the day was going to get worse for Canada and for the
And it did.
viewers. Yeah, and I do kind of have to agree with Robbie, who has come over to the dark side. Who says, I'm not sure
Yeah,
scoring a
Robbie's
penalty
had a
would have
real
made a real difference.
pessimistic turn in the last few weeks.
You you stick around long
You've
enough, and it'll
corrupted him.
happen to you too.
You've corrupted him. What have you done?
One at a time. One at a time. All right, so now we're gonna talk probably about the worst 5 minutes of this match. Okay, it's gonna happen. So Japan continued, especially after that missed penalty. Although Canada had been growing into the game, Japan really then did take the driver's seat, pretty
Yeah,
pretty definitively. They hit the crossbar with a free kick in the 28th minute, for example, as well. So it could have gotten worse, and they just continued to eliminate Canada's midfield. I think for me, we'll talk about how calamitous the defense was all along the back line, but for me, the midfield was almost non-existent in this match. Like, I forgot Ishmael Kone was out there in a bad way. Sam Piet struggled. I think he struggled to find his footing, his placement. He just never seemed to be in the right place at the right time, which is very much unlike him. And Jonathan Osorio, I could kind of say the same thing. Obviously, he's playing a more attacking role, so those players didn't get a lot to work with. But for me, again, he was really not very present in this match at all.
no.
And like I felt like Japan had the free run of the midfield completely.
Yeah,
It
there
was
was no
basically their
structure.
playground.
There was, yeah, everyone
Yeah.
just was on completely different pages. They're probably in different books, let alone the same page. And then
Mhm.
it looked like everyone was trying to do their own thing. And
It felt like 11
you look at,
strangers.
yeah, exactly. And when you look at that midfield, right, you have Jonathan Osorio, Simon Piet, and Ismail Kone. It's three very different types of player as well, right?
Mhm.
And you'd think that that would kind of help them complement one another because they do cover the three of them kind of cover most of the aspects of the
Yeah.
midfield in terms of just physicality
Yeah,
and,
like,
and
I can see
technical
the
quality and right.
rationale in putting those 3 players out
But
there.
it just seemed like there was no and for two of the midfielders that spent the whole season together, and for a third that is MLS, which means there's no lack of familiarity there. It's not like they've just kind of been. This is the first time on the field together. Semen Piet and Jonathan Osorio have been playing against each other for ever, and Semen
Yeah.
Piet and Ishmael Kone have been played together for a whole year. Right? They trained together, they played together, and I think that it just looked like you said, it was just three strangers because I don't know what kind of instructions or what kind of directives they were given,
Yeah.
but it just seemed like there was no cohesiveness and no kind of joint
Yeah.
idea of what was going on when they had the ball, and when they didn't have the
Mhm.
ball, it looked like nobody was sure of who to mark and nobody was sure of how they were marking the other team. It was just
Mhm.
all over the place.
Yeah, and, I tried to write about, like, the tactics, and, I said, "Okay, Mauro Biello, he deployed a 3-5-2, and he pretty much stuck with that throughout the match, even after subs came in, which we will talk about later." But, like, when I was trying to describe the tactics employed by Biello, I drew a blank because I couldn't identify them to save my life. Like, I'm not 100% sure what his, like, you could, like, kinda like you said, what his instructions to any of the players were. Um I just scratched my head. And maybe it's just more credit to the Japanese team for being as well drilled, as disciplined, and as ruthless as they were. But for me, like, Canada seemed woefully unprepared.
Yeah, I mean Japan scored like 25 goals in their last like 6 games or something, right? So
Yeah,
they deserve their flowers. They've been in incredible form and they've been
absolutely.
doing it against other really strong teams and teams from all over the
Exactly.
world. So this is Like
Yeah,
again,
I,
we went into this game not expecting much from Canada, but the
I think
gap in quality was so much bigger than we could have ever predicted. I think that's
you
what
know what, I
hurt the
wrote
most.
that almost verbatim. So thanks for reading from my playbook. All right, so let's forge through. Um, in
Let's
the
do it.
40th minute, Japan played a series of really slick, really quick one-touch passes that completely just left Canadian players in the dust, and it culminated in a cross played in from the Canadian right-hand side of the 18-yard box. Davies tried to clear the ball with his right foot. Unfortunately, though, his clearance was very errant and the ball bounced off of Milan Borjan and into the net for a Davies own goal to make it 2-0. Honestly, like this one was it was so bad it
That's
was
what did
almost
it for
funny.
me. That's what did it for me.
So did it for you?
No, I
And
did.
you were
Yeah,
like,
you can't help but laugh in a situation like
yeah.
that. You can't help but watch it and go, what am I watching? This
And you're
is
like, oh God, I have to do a podcast on this, so I have to watch the rest of it.
that was my exact reaction after the third goal. We'll talk about it. That was my first thoughts. Like, we have to talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it
Yeah.
was
I'm not sure how to break down that goal, honestly. It was just like, I mean, it happens to all players, not all players, but especially defenders. It happens so often. We've seen it happen for Montreal. We've seen it happen against Montreal. We've seen it happen, all over the world in soccer. So I think it was just a case of really unfortunate bad luck. But I just, kind of on top of the whole performance, just made it so much worse.
yeah. Like, the ball
Just
did skip up on Alfonso Davies, and
yeah,
like, that was a bit unexpected, but it was just the fact that, like, most own goals are these, especially from crosses, are like these desperate last touches
mhm,
that just go off a toe and then beat the goalie. But this was like the exact opposite, right? Alfonso Davies didn't have to stretch for it; it just bounced up on him, and the fact that it
yeah,
hits Milan Borjan on the way in, it adds to this like comedy of errors type thing where you just can't take it seriously.
yeah,
So I like you have this, like, it's like this belief. It's just like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. So what am I watching? And
indeed,
that feeling persisted for the rest of the game. But
indeed.
yeah,
Because we haven't even made it to halftime. We were at the 40th minute, but I can't even get to halftime and talk about that because I have to talk about another goal scored by Japan on Canada. Um, so Canada would not make it to halftime, unfortunately, without escaping further humiliation. Davies picked up a loose ball following a Japanese throw-in, passing the ball back to Kamal Miller. Kamal Miller quickly laid the ball off to Alistair Johnston. However, Johnston failed to control the ball, hit his pocket picked by Osana, and the Japanese attack wound up breaking forth, and it resulted in essentially a 2-on-1 right in front of Borjan. Obviously, really, really tough for the keeper to do much about that.
yeah,
Nakamura sent Canada into the halftime break with a 3-0 deficit to overcome. Again, like it's in a case of individual, confusion, error, just in just like I mean, if
yeah,
it's
exactly.
individual over and over and over, then it's kind of collective. But I mean, it's just not like what we're used to seeing from Alistair Johnston. He's been so
No,
stalwart. Even though when he plays at club level, he typically plays on the right flank. For Canada, he's been wonderful at that right center back position, and it's completely unexpected. Like I can't think of the last time I've seen him make an error like that.
no, I can't. I don't think he has, at least not for Montreal, for the national team, right? Something that egregious.
Yeah,
I don't think he's done, right. The last time an individual error that bad, it was probably Alfonso Davies. It was probably Kamal Miller at the World Cup, right?
oh
That
yeah,
goal, was it against Croatia, I think, or
yeah.
was it Morocco?
No,
Right,
I think it was in
that really
Croatia. It
bad goal.
was like one of the
Yeah,
last goals. It was like the last goal I
yeah,
think Croatia
exactly.
scored.
And that was
Yeah,
the last time I can remember an individual error that bad, right? So
yeah,
look, I mean, at that point, I was kind of like desperately scraping for silver linings or anything. And my silver lining was these goals are all so ridiculous and so dumb. that these cannot be a reflection of how of this team, right?
Okay.
The first one are just like a series of bad clearances that happens, but the other two are so ridiculously out of character and just
Yeah.
stupid that I told myself that this is a 1-0 game. And that, like, yes, this game is over, but in my
Okay.
eyes, Canada's losing 1-0. And that is the only
Okay.
way I managed to watch the second half and to kind of cope and not just
Okay.
revert to
Yeah.
the fetal position in the corner of my room was the fact that I,
You
I kind of
developed an alternate
rationalized it.
reality.
Exactly. This is just
Okay.
that was my coping mechanism of just I
Okay.
convinced myself that they were down 1-0 on merit and then 3-0 on nonsense.
Okay. I don't know what to say about that logic. So I'm just gonna say whatever gets you
So
through the day.
it's a small glimpse into the absolute tire fire that is my mind watching soccer.
And just before we move on, we do have a comment as well from the Holy Gale who says, I put a shot of Bailey's in my coffee after that own goal. Proper thing. I would have done the same had I not been on my way to work, sadly.
That would have been a great
Uh
sight in the
yeah,
bus. Just
right? Well, yeah, and at the office. Yeah. Just so I think I would have had to bring my whole bottle with me. All right. So at halftime, obviously, let's face it, you're going into halftime 3-0 down, missed penalty, the calamity, I don't even know what to call them, the comedy of errors series of concessions. Like, honestly, I don't know what Mauro Biello could have said or could have done to try to bring things around, other than maybe saying, like, it can't get worse than this. Like, this is pretty much as
but
bad
it
as it
can.
gets. Only a little bit. But no, like, I mean, the second half, of which we'll talk about, it was not as bad as the first. And
Yes, that is true. That yeah. To be fair,
yeah,
the bar
like,
is literally in hell. But yes,
the bar is low.
it was
And
not as
I gotta
bad.
tell you, you know what? I'm kind of now seeing. I'm gonna say it, and I'm gonna say it in a way, and I'm gonna say it in a way that is not the way that I mean it. I understand now how Hattie balances us out. Because we're just here like, it's so bad, it's so bad, it's so bad. And I know that if he were here, he'd be able to kind of find something to cling to. But unfortunately, pessimistic Eve is running the show this evening. So sorry. Sorry to any
We're
of
all
our listeners
buying into it.
who find that this might be a little bit of a darker tone for this episode of The Ball is Round. It's yeah, Hattie has a purpose. All right. So honestly, I debated posing it as a question to you, but it's kind of like, it's a question. It's kind of a little bit annoying and it's a little bit silly. But for me, I would have liked to see Mauro Biello, I think, go to a 4-4-2 out of the half. I think they needed something a lot more conservative, a lot more compact. Alfonso Davies, obviously he can carry the team for sure from any position. But having three at the back was not working for Canada. The midfield trio was non-existent. David and Laren were getting no service whatsoever up front. So I honestly kind of hoped that there would have been a massive shuffling done at halftime. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Canada would go on to play the rest of the match in the 3-5-2 formation. But I just want it on the record that if I'd been in that dressing room, I would have reorganized the team into a 4-4-2, and I probably would have pulled out Ishmael Kone in favor of perhaps a Mathieu Choinière, who can obviously fill in as an 8 or an attacking player, or maybe even Harry Patton, who we haven't seen very, very much of at all in quite a long time. But kind of just anybody to be a little bit less invisible out there. So I just wanted that on the record. Did you have any thoughts about what you would like to have seen after the second or after halftime?
Yeah, I think this is a situation where you kind of just give minutes to those who don't have as many.
Mm-hmm.
You try and let some people find a way to enjoy the experience, and that will happen more with the people that are either getting their debut, like Mathieu Choinière,
Mm-hmm.
or some of the people like Harry Patton who don't see the field as often,
Or
or who or
Yeah.
any of the other younger players that you may be considering for future tournaments and
Hmm.
future qualifying matches. So I think that, and we're going to talk a bit about later about formations, but um yeah, I think that moving forward, this team is probably better suited for a four back than a three
Hmm.
back. Just with the way that, with Steven Vittorio on his way out, with, some of the older guard kind of moving out, and the concept of a proper three back not really being that prevalent in the game
Yeah.
today. Um, and given all the talent you have in the middle of the field, I think that, we're going to start seeing. I'd like to start seeing the three back phased out, but again, that only happens. These drastic tactical and formation changes only happen once you have an
A
actual manager
permanent.
set in place,
Yeah.
right? A permanent manager, not an active. Marbiel is an actual manager, a
Yeah.
permanent manager set in place, right? So if they're gonna go ahead and pull the trigger, say Morbiello is the guy for at least until after Copa America, assuming they qualify until after Copa America, and then Gold Cup and World Cup we will see when we get there.
Hmm.
Then he can kind of say, okay, let me,
Decide.
get in the thick of it and and
Yeah.
and and work this team the way I want it to be worked. But I think that until we have any kind of permanence or semi-permanence, um, we're gonna kind of be stuck with the status quo because I don't think Morbiello is gonna want to shake too much up until he
No.
knows exactly where his future lies.
No, no, I that's understandable. If you're in the interim role and you kind of know that's what you're doing, um, then I can understand that, to a certain degree for sure. All right, so we did see one sub after the halftime break, which was a like for like swap. Derek Cornelius left the pitch for Steven Vittoria, who took up obviously that middle position of the back three. And unfortunately, after the return from half, it was just kind of a continuation of things going from bad to worse. So returning from halftime, just a few minutes after the kickoff, Alistair Johnson tried a long pass, but it was intercepted. And once again, of course, Japan carried the ball into the Canadian half. And once again, there was some bobbling, I guess, attempts to
Oof.
clear the ball, and it was kind of bouncing around a little bit awkwardly for sure along that 18-yard line. Unfortunately, Canada's defenders were unable to intercept that loose ball, and Tanaka scored his second of the night to give the hosts a 4-0 lead. I'm breaking this one down. I'm running out of ways to describe it.
This
This
goal
one to me
was
was
more
probably
upsetting than the first goal for me.
really. I was gonna say this one
Yeah.
upset me less. Okay, go on. Maybe I just come
Just
to terms with it.
because at the end of the day, all the first goal was just some really bad clearance and then a shot that beat
Hmm.
the keeper, right? This
Yeah.
was actively multiple failings in defense, not clearing and active defending, right? In marking and winning your tackles and just following your player, right? Because yes, like the quick passing and the nice little flicks from Japan were very impressive and they were very cool,
Hmm.
but holy, they made the Canadian defense look second
Amateurish.
rate,
Mm.
amateurish. I don't want to use the word again, but that's the exact word. They were out of shape immediately. They were following the ball instead of following their players. They got caught ball watching on like three times in the span of 10 seconds. Like half the defense got caught watching the ball instead of their player. And it really seemed like a training exercise for Japan, right?
Hmm.
Where you tell the
Yeah.
defense kind of go half speed just so the offense can kind of work the kinks out of something. It was that was so much more upsetting than the first goal because of the fact that this wasn't just like an oops, like I mishit it. This was actively shutting your brain off and not defending,
Okay. Fair
which was
enough.
that much more frustrating because you kind of hung Milan Borjan out to dry there,
Yeah.
and there
I think
was
you got
no
hung out to dry
willingness
on
to.
the first goal as well, a little bit.
He did, but that was
For
also from outside the box, and it was
yeah,
right, it was that
maybe
was a whole
deflected.
mess. This was a
Yeah.
point blank shot that should have never had gone even close to being that open or in that area in the penalty or that, that dangerously
Mhm.
close in the penalty area.
Yeah. Okay. No, and I can see that for sure. I think for me, I found the first goal more upsetting just because it was like so many players, failed to clear the ball repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly.
Mhm.
That it was just like I
Yeah,
was
that's
seeing
fair.
the,
It
the
looked like
same
in
problem
America's
over and
Funniest
over
Home
and over.
Videos.
A little bit. So anyway, it happened. Japan scored their fourth and mercifully final goal of the match morning if you were located in Canada. So let's look at some silver linings here in this match. Finally,
Yes.
we
Ooh,
have
so
in the 61st minute, Mora Biello changed out the entire midfield trio. So Junior Hoylett came in to replace Ishmael Kone, Harry Patton replaced Samuel Piet, and Montreal's own Mathieu Choignard made his national team debut, replacing Jonathan Osorio. Um,
yes.
was this a slight consolation for you, Elias?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was more of a consolation than the actual goal, was seeing Mr. Chonier in a Canadian
Yeah.
jersey. Yeah, I mean, look, he's been, uh, depending on how you see it, he's been Montreal's best, if not second best player all season. And he's become a testament of that academy, but also of, homegrown Canadian talent. So to see him
Mhm.
finally get his flowers is super awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, I was super happy, and even if it was just a half-hour cameo, he did all right. He didn't look out of place,
No.
and I think that the most important part was he got some visibility. And look, we expected Mauro Biello to have a bit more of an eye towards Montreal, given his background and his connection with the club, and
Mhm.
the fact that Steven Eustáquio unfortunately couldn't make it, first of all cemented
Also
Samuel
helped.
Piet's place in the starting 11,
Yeah.
but also did give Mathieu Chonière an outside chance at seeing some minutes, because if Steven Eustáquio starts that game, then Samuel Piet's probably the guy getting subbed on, and Mathieu Chonière is
Mm.
most likely an unused sub. If not, maybe he gets 10 minutes. So the fact that
Yeah.
this opportunity arose for him is great.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. No,
And
and
he was
I
and he was a
think
+1 on the field, so
exactly.
he was
He
active.
was visible. So there we go. Um, no, overall, like I mean, I don't necessarily. I would hope actually that Mauro Biello, in the context of the national team, wouldn't give deference to Montreal players just by virtue of them being, from Montreal or playing for Montreal. If that's the case, like he has no business, being interim manager even. Um, but I think regardless of who's at the helm, Choignard has worked extremely hard, his whole career certainly, but also this year. And yeah, for me, it was well deserved. It would have been nicer to see him, of course, come on in happier circumstances, but your debut is your debut, and you got to make the most of whatever you can get. So very, very happy to see him be rewarded for a whole lot of perseverance in his career, for sure. Um, yeah, so I'm ready to move on and just talk about Canada's goal on this so that we can wrap up this play by play. Because this has not
Absolutely.
been the funnest match of my life to talk about. All right,
No,
so Junior
far from.
Hoylett would give Canada a consolation goal when Jonathan David's low cross was parried by the keeper Osako, falling straight to the veteran's feet. And of course, he had a composed finish to get Canada on the scoreboard at least. Nice to at least get a goal in this match.
Yeah,
I think
and
that
it was well
was
worked too. I think
it was it.
that's the most important part. It wasn't just a gimme. I mean, I think that I could have done better to handle the cross, but
Mhm.
the build up to the cross was promising, right? It was positive, and it was getting forward, and the passes were linking up. So
Yeah, for
the
sure.
one silver line.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Japan made a ton of subs in the second half. I'm not sure how much of that maybe was credited to their team. Kind of what's the word? Kind of like just lacking that cohesion because it was a lot of players who
That's
aren't
possible.
necessarily together as much. But all the same, Canada at least made an admirable acquittal of themselves, towards the end of that half. And let's face it, that's probably what people are going to remember the most anyway. So, yeah. So the match ended at 4-1 in favor of the hosts. Obviously, a richly deserved scoreline for them. Aside from the errors that led to the goals that we discussed, I think overall just they were just a lot more cohesive, a lot more disciplined, a lot more organized than the Canadian team. And personally, I have no issues with the scoreline being what it was. I don't think Canada deserved more than they got from this match.
No, not at all.
No. So looking ahead, because that is going to happen. We know that Canada will be playing next month, November 21st. They're going to be back in Toronto to face a CONCACAF opponent for Nations League quarterfinals, which also serves, of course, as qualifiers for the 2024 Copa America. So, of course, we don't know who's going to be managing the national team at that time. We don't know if it's going to be BLO or if it's going to be an identified permanent manager. But, kind of looking ahead, and maybe I'll even just in the event that it is Mauro BLO, we can address Robbie's question as well. So why can't BLO? I'm going to assume that you're meaning why can't BLO kind of shake things up now? And doesn't he want to impress? And yeah, our opposition is likely to be Jamaica. I don't think it's been 100% confirmed yet, but it is most likely going to be Jamaica.
As far as why he can't really switch things up, I think it might also be some instructions from the higher ups going, just as interim, keep the ship afloat, and then if you do get permanent, I think that maybe on top of that, the fact that maybe he's still getting a feel for the team, and if he wants to present a project and maybe some kind of a foundation that he wants to build on, if he wants to apply for this permanent position, maybe he started getting a feel for it while working as interim and seeing what's working, what isn't working, what's clearly not working. But I think that right now it's kind of just, especially because it's his first window in charge, that his main priority right now is just making sure that everything gets done. And then, if there's some traction with him staying on board until, Copa America qualifiers, and then if they qualify, then the actual tournament itself, then maybe he can start to apply a bit more of his own personal style, his own personal flair. But that's my best guess. But again, there could be 101 other reasons as to why we didn't really see much of a difference.
Okay. Yeah. No. Fair enough. And yeah, I don't disagree with any of the reasons that you posited. For me, I just don't. My experience with Mauro Biello as a coach has not been a lot of tactical complexity, a lot of necessarily daringness, aside from the time that he benched Drogba, which was pretty bold. But from a tactical perspective, I think he tends to keep things pretty simple. And so I think that's kind of more my perspective of not seeing him necessarily get too flashy or too experimental with anything. But looking at the display that we got, and we can also look back, of course, on previous matches that Canada played, earlier this year as well. If you want to factor it in, go for it. Who would you like to see? Is there anyone in particular that you think should be called into the next camp, knowing it's a competitive window, or anyone you think should be dropped to not come into that camp?
I've made my feelings clear about, the changing of the guard, and I would have liked to see it in a friendlier setting than super important qualification matches. Which is why I'm a little bit concerned that we won't see it happen against whatever team that, again, like Robbie said, likely Jamaica, but whatever team Canada faces in November, we won't see this idea of what the future looks like, and we still may get a lot of the usual suspects. But yeah, people like, I would love to see the next generation of keepers, right? You have Dane Sinclair, you have Maxime Crépeau, you have Jonathan Sirois, who are all playing at a very high level in MLS. You have one who has been to the highest level in MLS, who's won an MLS Cup, who's played in a final, who has that big match experience. I think that we need to start to see that kind of idea. I think that you need to find an heir for Steven Vittoria. Right now, it's looking to be Derek Cornelius. I'd like to see Derek Cornelius get
I like to see him
just a
at the
bit more
left of the.
composure.
Yeah,
It
I
would be
pref.
interesting to see, maybe Kamal Miller take some time in the
Yeah,
middle, given that he likes to be on the ball, and maybe Derek Cornelius out wide, like you said, that could be a very interesting switch up.
yeah,
The problem is all these are going to be coming now that it's a competitive match, which is
yeah. That's
why I'm worried that we may get a bit more of the status quo that has very
yeah.
clearly not done the trick. So
Well, I think
that's
the
my
thing
bit of
is
pessimism.
it did do the trick last year, right? I mean, the vast majority of the squad was with Canada leading up to the World Cup, which is basically the pinnacle of certainly this era of Canada
Yes.
soccer's success for the men's program. And so, there is a history of it working, right?
Yeah.
But obviously, we're coming up on that being a year ago, and some of these players are no spring chicken. Like a Steven Vittoria, for example, or Milan Borjan. Obviously, keepers can play for ages, but nonetheless,
As we've seen.
yeah. I mean, Junior Hoylett as well. Probably time to start considering him, and obviously, he is coming in off the bench more often than not now. So okay,
And
but
hopefully
yeah,
Tajon Buchanan is healthy by
hopefully
November.
Tajon Buchanan is
That's another
healthy, but
big thing that
that
hasn't
was
been
a
considered.
big miss. Yes, no, and that's a good call. Thank you for mentioning that. Obviously, I think we maybe talked about it when the squad was dropped that he just wasn't called up because
Yeah.
he's injured. But I wholeheartedly agree, and obviously we are going to very, very much want Steve Eustakio to be healthy as well.
Who knows though?
Uh,
Maybe they'll recreate that magic. It's November in Toronto. It was
that's
crazy
true.
last time when they qualified for the World Cup. But again, like you said, right, that it worked for them in the World Cup qualifiers, but they had so much momentum going for them, right?
They did.
This is almost the exact opposite with the way they crashed out of the World Cup, with the way the Nations League ended, and the way the Gold Cup ended. They have almost done a 180 momentum wise.
Yeah, and they
So
no longer have the
hopefully that,
coach.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
leading
hopefully
the
Lightning
helm.
can kind of strike twice at BMO Field. And
Yeah,
in the elements, I'm sure that Canada is much more comfortable playing in Toronto in November than Jamaica is, or again, assuming it's Jamaica. Um, so that'll be interesting to find out. But I do think that uh, they're in very different places mentally than they were last time they were in a do or die qualifying game in Toronto.
hmm
So it'll be interesting to see what kind of Canada shows up. I'm just a bit disappointed that we won't get that many changes because it's such a crucial game.
yeah. No, I wholeheartedly agree. And like I said, I would like to see a 4-4-2 tried, just because of how bad this 3-5-2 was. But we will see. In the immortal words of Hattie, let's wait and see.
We will see.
Uh, yeah, let's wait and see. Do you have anything else to say on this match, on the upcoming match? Anything that I didn't give you the opportunity to talk about, Elias?
No, I think we covered it, and honestly, I think that much like the players themselves, the sooner we forget about this Japan match, the better, because
Agree.
there's really no positives to take away from it in terms of from a team perspective. There's nothing good to take away from it.
No. All right. So let's turn our attention to MLS, because by the time you and I reconvene, hopefully Sunday, knock on wood, hopefully back to regularly scheduled programming on Sunday. I said that last episode, though, so I'm almost afraid to say it this episode. Um, we will know whether or not CF Montreal will have made the playoffs or not.
Yes.
So just to take a look again, just to remind folks of where things stand. Here are the standings. So there were a couple of games, but they didn't involve any teams like that are kind of vying for those qualification spots. So no concerns there. So we've got obviously Montreal in 8th on 41 points with 12 wins. That's where I cut this off, just because wins is the first tiebreaker. So Then we have the eliminated DC United in 9th place, which we know they're going to drop below the red line. Well, it's a black line, but nonetheless, they're going to drop below the line one way or another. They've already been eliminated. Then we have New York and Chicago, both on 40 points and 10 wins. Charlotte is on 39 points, but they have 2 matches left to play, unlike everyone else who has 1 match. And in 13th position, we have NYCFC on 38 points. On 38 points with 8 wins on the season. So, obviously going to be a very challenging decision day, and just a reminder of what the decision day matchups are going to look like as well. So on Wednesday, Charlotte is going to play that game in hand against Miami, and they will be at Miami for that one. But then they're going to be hosting Miami on October 21st. Then, so Cincinnati and Atlanta are playing. That doesn't really have much to do with Montreal or much to do with the playoff decisions. Then Columbus is hosting Montreal. Of course, Wilfred Nancy, Rudy Camacho are present there. NYCFC is hosting Chicago. Nashville, already qualified, is hosting New York Red Bulls. And another match that doesn't have a lot of bearing is New England versus Philadelphia. I think there is another match as well, but it just doesn't involve the teams that are vying for those playoff spots, so I just didn't include it in my screenshot. Anyway, we talked last week about kind of what we think is going to happen. You think that there is a playoff team in these boots. I think that the fates have just been so cruel to Montreal all year that they are going to continue along with their theme of cruelty and will punish them once again.
That's entirely reasonable.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But let me ask you, if, and I say if because I don't believe, if Montreal were to make the playoffs, what would be your ideal playoff opponent for them?
Ooh. If it's on the road, Charlotte, because Charlotte is probably the even though it has one of the best crowds, is probably the least strong home opponent, and Montreal has already managed to take a point away from Charlotte on the road with that,
which is one of few exploits that they've managed on the road.
So I think that when you're looking on the road, a worst case scenario, although it's impossible actually, but a worst case scenario on the road would be New York City, because Montreal is just it's cosmic. There's something stronger than, there's something supernatural at foot here.
Yeah.
New York just cannot lose against Montreal. I think it's happened twice in the entire history of NYCFC. Anyway, but realistically, that is mathematically impossible for that to happen for New York to host Montreal. So at least there's that. But again, like I said, at home, anything's a good pick, because Montreal at home is a completely different team. Again, as long as it's not New York City FC, I like Montreal's chances at home. On the road, I think if I had to pick one perfect opponent, again, there's no perfect opponent for Montreal on the road, but if I had to pick the best of the worst, it would definitely have to be Charlotte, just because of the fact that there is a good matchup, and the fact that Montreal has already experience with, any kind of result on the road there. So I think that's my two takeaways from any kind of Montreal playoff game.
Right on, fair enough. Obviously, there are some. It's going to be one of those decision days, I think, where we're going to have to keep our eyes on kind of the schedule. There are some years where we haven't had to do that because Montreal's already been eliminated, and there are some years where we haven't had to do that just because, Montreal was just qualified and their place was kind of locked in, right? But in this case, I think we are going to have to really actually watch all the other matches, because we know, for example, NYCFC and Chicago are playing each other. So, one of those is going to eliminate the other, or neither one will pass, for example. So they're going to have a lot of bearing. And I think we'll also have a vested interest on the Wednesday night matchup, even if Lionel Messi isn't there. I think we're also going to have a very vested interest. And by the sounds of it, you're going to be rooting for Charlotte that night, Elias.
No, I'm obviously I'll be rooting for Miami because if Charlotte drops points, that makes it even less likely that
Yeah.
they'll end up in eighth. But
Yeah.
at the same time, they're the only team. They're the team that we talked about this last week, right? They're the team that's
Yep.
probably the best placed to host a playoff game because they're
Agreed.
playing two games against a Miami side that has nothing to play for right now with an
And
injured
they
Messi.
exactly. And they're back to conceding their fair share of goals.
Exactly.
Um, yeah. The only thing I would say, yeah, the only thing, yeah, no, I overall agree
Because
with you.
at the same
I
time,
think that,
I don't see Chicago taking points off of New York at home at Yankee Stadium just because it's so famously impossible to play at Yankee Stadium.
yeah,
And Red Bulls going on the road to Nashville, who still has something to play for because they can climb as high as like fifth, I think, if they win
yeah,
and
they
stuff
can
goes
climb
their
as high
way.
as fifth. You're right. You're right.
Right. So they still have something to play for. So they're not going to be rotating their squad. They will be playing their best 11.
Exactly.
Um, so I think that, Red Bulls on the road has not been a great team either. And going against a team
No,
like Nashville who know how to get it done. Look, if there was ever a way for Montreal to have a favorable decision day, this is it.
this
But
is
again,
like the
this is
best
Montreal we're
setup.
talking about. And exactly.
Yeah.
But this is Montreal we're talking about, and nothing is rarely so simple. So, you know,
Yeah.
I leave it in the hands of the universe, and then whatever
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. It does sound like, though, I think kind of both of us are a little bit in agreement that it's, and actually I'll use Robbie's words. A victory in Columbus would be sweet,
Yes,
although very
exactly.
unlikely, which is why I think we're focusing so much on those other matchups, because I think
Yeah,
Montreal will end up needing some help from the soccer gods if they want to make playoffs, whether that's on the road or in it. I say playoffs, it's play in. Um, whether they want to extend their season. There we go, whether it's on the road or at home. Obviously, at home
because
would
you just
be,
know the second the schedule was released, Wilfried Nancy saw the last game against Montreal
oh yeah.
and started salivating and like rubbing his hands and laughing maniacally because if there's one thing he wants to do is put the final nail in this team's coffin's playoffs hopes of this team's playoffs hopes. So
Oh
I
my
don't think that
god.
we're gonna get a very rotated Columbus squad. I think they're gonna come and try and put as many goals as possible behind Jonathan Sirois.
Overall, kind of agree with you. And, I mean, they can still take third spot as well from Philadelphia, which is, more kind of for pride than anything else. But obviously, as well, you never know, there might be like financial incentives and bonuses, from the club perspective behind that, right? So, yeah. So, once again, in the immortal words of Hattie, we'll wait and see.
We will wait and see.
I Anyway, if I had to offer my thoughts, I guess, on who I would want Montreal to play, I agree with you. Charlotte on the road is probably quote unquote the friendliest opponent. If Montreal does have to travel, should they make the playoffs, and I agree with you, NYCFC would be a nightmare, but thankfully not possible. I also think traveling to New York Red Bulls has historically not gone very well for Montreal. So if I had to pick a road match that I would not want Montreal to have, it would be at New York Red Bulls. Just one of the ones that's possible to actually happen. And if I had to pick a team to come to Montreal, I would probably prefer. Hmm, they seem to have a pretty good handle on Charlotte when Charlotte visited the first time. Um, and again, I don't want Frank Klopas to come again and rain on our
That too.
parade.
That too.
Frank Klopas and Kai Kamara, I feel like that's kind of one of those stories
It's just
where,
too kismet. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna
A
say also
90th
not
minute
that
Kai
least.
Kamara winner is just it's there. So I don't want to see
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Respectfully to
exactly.
Kai Kamara, I
Yeah,
don't want that to happen.
yeah. No, the stadium I think would probably crumble under all like the booze. Even though I
I
know he's
mean,
he's still very well loved by Montreal fans, but
he's still the
Montreal
Montreal
fans can
killer, right? He made a
exactly.
living off of making Montreal fans miserable until he got to Montreal. So I wouldn't put it past him to return to old habits.
Exactly. Alrighty. So yeah, Sunday coming. Hopefully Sunday anyway. We
6
will
p.m. by the
have
way, 6 p.m. Remember. It's not 7:30. It's 6 p.m.
No, they're playing on Saturday though. It is Saturday that they're playing. I'm talking about when you and I record. Sorry,
Oh,
but
yes, yes.
just to
But
clarify,
decision
yes,
day for
decision
everybody
day.
watching or listening, 6 p.m.
Yes,
So don't open your TV at 7:30 going, wait a minute. It is at 6.
yeah, it's already been decided. Yes, so 6 p.m. Eastern, Saturday the 21st, and we will hopefully be back together on Sunday the 22nd at 7:30 to well, the tone of our show will be very, very dependent on what happens there.
TBD, yeah.
Yeah, very much TBD. All right. I think that that's kind of all we have. Obviously, regardless of what happens, we'll kind of get our thoughts on the overall season for Montreal for Sunday. And we'll do our in-depth post-mortem as we always do, in the weeks that follow whenever Montreal season truly does end. But we'll certainly go into, I think, more thoughts on Montreal season as a whole, one way or the other, next week when we know whether or not Montreal season's over. So, shall I turn it over to you, my intrepid co-host?
Yes, the Twitters was very active. Let's do some social media.
All right. Okay. And I
Alrighty.
do have all 5 ready. Good for me.
Huzzah. Yes, so the first one is from Thomas Hewitt. Here's the Canadian women's national team players who qualified for the NWSL playoffs. From Portland, the Portland Thorns, we have Christine Sinclair and Janine Becky. The San Diego Wave has obviously Caitlin Sheridan. The Orlando Reign, the OL Reign, sorry, I keep on saying wrong. The OL Reign has Quinn and Jordan Heidema, and obviously North Carolina Courage has Sydney Collins. Have you been following NWSL?
Of
And
course.
of these teams, which Canadian do you think is most likely or has the best chance at grabbing some silverware this year?
I mean, Portland have dominated a lot of the stats this year. Obviously, that being said, San Diego Wave clinched the Shield this year for the first time. It's they're a very young club, so I'm like, for the first time in their history, but for a very young club nonetheless. So they've obviously been exceptional this season. If I had to pick one, I'm kind of torn, honestly, between the Thorns and the Wave overall. I think, you know, the Thorns have had such a prolific attack, especially with like Sophia Smith and Christine Sinclair. No words need to be said, but she plays a much more supporting role now. But then, kind of on the flip side, the Wave have been so strong defensively. Like Kaylin Sheridan hasn't had to necessarily work as hard, I don't think, certainly as she does with the national team. So I guess if I had to pick one, they say offense wins games, but defense wins championships. So I guess I'll give it to the Wave.
I am in agreement, especially as someone who loves defense in general. Just defense, because offense slumps, offense has highs and lows. If you have a
Yes.
solid, reliable defense like San Diego's had all season, that's always something to lean on. And when it comes to these big games, these do or die games,
Yeah.
that's who you look for. And when you look for a result, you always look to your defense to kind of
Yeah.
secure something. And then all you need is one. So I think I've got the Wave too. It's going to be a
Okay.
very interesting playoff. The entire season was very competitive, and I cannot wait.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, yeah, just I don't know. The more I think about it, I'm like, you scored so many freaking goals. I'm like, maybe I was wrong, but
It'll be a very
we'll see.
interesting, meeting of two very different philosophies.
Yeah,
Which
should
is
both make the
always what
final.
makes it so fun. Exactly, right? If they both end up there, there's you have this high powered offense against this
Hmm.
super strong defense. It really is what you always want to see. You don't want to see
Hmm.
two super defensive teams play against each other because then it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily make for the most enticing
Yeah,
final. But when you have these two teams are so good at what they do, it's
yeah,
always nice to see two teams at the top
yeah,
of their game kind of battle it
yep.
out.
Oh, and I forgot to say that my last thought on the Wave is that they're entering playoffs in better form than the Thorns. So I just double checked actually my numbers here, and so the Wave have only lost one of their last 6 matches, whereas the Thorns have lost 3 of their last 6, and they're coming into it
Momentum
on a
is
loss and a draw.
big.
It's huge for playoffs.
Yeah.
So that's my final thought. But I really like that tweet, and so thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that one.
Always good to have Canadian national teams winning
For
trophies or
sure.
fighting for trophies at least.
For sure.
Yes, this is yeah.
All right, next
All right,
up.
this is from Patrice Bernier saying teams in MLS with percentage of minutes played by under 21 players this season in the Eastern Conference. Chicago, Toronto, in order from most to fewest. This is the top 6. Chicago, Toronto, Miami, NYCFC, Red Bulls, CF Montreal, Atlanta. Of the again, we at the Balls Round always say
Play the
play the
youth.
youth.
We are just busting out all of Hattie's catchphrases here. I hope he listens to this episode.
It's just
in his
this
in
is
his
for Hattie. This is the
travels.
Hattie tribute
Yeah.
episode. Given this play the youth, seeing all 6 of the bottom of the teams with the most, youth usage, if you will, all of them are either eliminated from the playoffs or fighting for, one of the last playoff spots and not really fighting towards the top of the standings. What does that say to you? And what does that make you think about the future of, younger players in MLS?
Oh, I'm just going to bring it up again just to remind myself here. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. Like overall, it's a weird look. We've seen young players on very, very, very good sides in MLS be great, right? And likewise, we've seen young players on very, very average sides of MLS teams also be great, and we've seen young players on both sides be average as well. That being said, I think it also speaks to the need to balance your squad, and kind of surround your developing players with veterans and with more or not veteran, but more established players who have kind of been around the block and who have been through some trials already with their team, and who have maybe even played some huge matches with their team, whereas it's going to be the very first time for some of these players. Also, several of these clubs, they went through some intense injury crises. Looking at Toronto, like those numbers are kind of abnormal for Toronto, but we know
Yeah.
how decimated their squad was.
Given they have
So
one
I
of
think,
the oldest squads in the league.
yeah. So yeah, also that, good point. So I think for me, like, yeah, the standings kind of where these teams are, I think it just speaks to there being a really fine line between playing the youth and kind of sending the youth out to do all the work by themselves. Not obviously it's not by themselves, but you know what I mean. I
Yeah.
think it just indicates maybe that these teams leaned really, really hard into it, and it's a gamble at the end of the day when it's a young player, because you don't know exactly sort of how ready they are for the pros.
That's so true.
Yeah, so that's kind of my thought, and just some balance.
Yeah, it's always about balance, but they have to get some exposure because, well, they're the future.
100%. All right, next up.
Next up, yes, we have a tweet from Kamal Miller Enthusiast, which is just an amazing Twitter name. If we finally switch to a back four,
yes,
who do you prefer at right back? Buchanan, Johnston, or Larea? I'd personally go with Johnston just because he's a natural. We talked about this before. We're talking about it again.
Mm-hmm.
What does your back four as a whole look like? Because again, we have Alphonso Davies, who now plays at left back, but would you push him further up the field and use some other pieces? What does a back four in a 4-4-2, like you said you wanted to see, what does a back four look like for Eve?
I do agree. I think with Alistair Johnston right back in this scenario, and it's no hatred. I like Tajon Buchanan higher up the pitch myself. But I think Tajon Buchanan, if you play him higher up the pitch, you do need to have a slightly more conservative-minded player, which for me would be Alistair Johnston out of the options mentioned in the tweet there. Otherwise, I think put Sam Adekugbe on the left flank. as left back, and again push Alfonso Davies up to give him free reign to really carry that Canadian attack. And then in the middle, it's a little for me, it's a little bit challenging to identify who would play on the right of that right back, or of that left back or center back. There we go, of that center back pairing. I think certainly you could have Kamal Miller play as the left center back. I know that
Yeah.
he is most comfortable as left center back in a back three. So it might require some adjustment on his part. But I think overall, like, my biggest question would be who would end up playing that right center back position. And maybe that's kind of where one of the players who's a little bit more on the fringes could come in, like a Zach McGraw or like a Kyle Hebert,
Because my
or,
biggest concern with Derek
even
Cornelius in
Moise
the back four
Bombito.
is just the lack of pace, right?
Yeah.
He would get burned for pace a lot, and he doesn't have the support of two other center backs. So I tend to agree with you that, he would probably need a
And
more
come
physically athletic.
Yeah. And I mean, Kamal Miller isn't exactly the paciest defender in the history of time
That is
either,
also
by any
true.
stretch.
That is also true.
So maybe then a younger player, because I think you'd have enough experience on that back line to be able to guide a younger player. So maybe somebody like Moise Mabito, we did see him play at the back, or, I know Kyle Hebert, he's not young, but he's kind of early on in his coming out of his pro career, certainly. Yeah, so just, I don't know, maybe one of those slightly less experienced players.
Now, with Richie Larea in the mix, right? What would you say to Alistair Johnston filling that position of right center back if you are looking for a more athletic, pacey counterpart to, again, like we said,
Yeah.
the not
I think
super
it's
quick Kamal
just,
Miller?
yeah, and you know what? I think it's just a lack of having seen it that makes me hesitant um to
It would be great
say
to
it,
use in
but
a friendly, if only they had a friendly to try that.
alas. But no, overall, yeah, it's certainly not a bad idea. It's just kind of a little bit of a hard one to wrap my mind around. I think is where I'm at with that.
This is why you
But
need as many friendlies as possible, Canada. But
yeah.
that is neither here nor there, because that will be a whole other hour-long conversation for another time.
For sure. But you know what? That kind of does remind me a little bit. I did want to mention, like, I had kind of complained about Canada not playing friendlies against a lot of strong competition, and I asked for it and I got it. Thanks. I think.
Well,
I forgot to
I just
mention
think
that.
it was
Sorry.
a combination of factors that, were just not ideal with, an interim coach
No.
and a game on the other side of the
Yeah,
planet, and,
I know,
no
but
Steven Stacchio, no Tejan Buchanan. It was just a bunch of really bad things happening at the same time.
yeah, I know, but it took me like an hour and 15 minutes to realize that I had forgotten a slight silver lining, which was that I had asked for Canada to play
That is true.
more varied opposition, and high caliber opposition, and I got what I asked for.
Yes, you
And that's that. All right, let's move on to our next tweet.
did. Moving on to the next one,
Um,
yes. This is from Audrey Magny.
oh,
There's something special about the grounds. This is about Wanderers grounds, obviously. Even if my first visit was only 2 weeks ago, I've decided to take a last-minute road trip to cover CanPL playoffs match between Halifax Wanderers and Pacific FC. We
okay,
talked about Wanderers ground and how great Wanderers ground is last episode.
we did.
If
We're gonna do it again.
it's very symbolic to Halifax and to Nova Scotia, and it's very, you could tell it's a part of the culture of the city.
Mhm.
If Montreal were to make their own Wanderers ground style field, which is more of an homage to Montreal, how would you like to, or what would you like to see represented in it?
Well, I thought you were like making like a temporary stadium, and I was like, "What is wrong?"
No,
I
not
was like,
temporary
"Well,
stadium,
why
but
is?" Yeah.
because
Um.
again, like, because I got the chance to speak
Yeah.
with Elias Iliadis, who had come back from his loan at
Yeah.
Atletico Ottawa, and he was raving about Wanderers ground, and he didn't even know it was a temporary stadium. I told him temporary, and he goes, "No
Oh,
way,"
that's so
because it
cute.
doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
So it's very clear that it's not just the fans, it's not just, the outside that appreciates Wanderers ground. The players as well really enjoy playing there because it's such
Yeah.
an awesome layout. If
Like a
Montreal
little.
were to have an
Yeah.
homage to Montreal style stadium,
Mm.
what would you like to see featured?
I mean, you do kind of almost feel like at Stade Saputo, like with the Olympic Tower in the background, you're kind of like, well,
It's a good start.
it's like, yeah, exactly. That's a good start. But obviously, as we know, they can't do anything there, um, sadly. So, an homage to Montreal. I'm feeling snarky, so I'm like, put some bike lanes around it. Just built a little cycling track around the outside of the stadium. Actually, maybe that would help us out with the taxes. um, and you gotta prepare me for these. I think something that would be really interesting is just to kind of is as well to see some maybe some symbolism of the bridges. Obviously, they are you can kind of love them or you can hate them, but they connect Montreal to other parts of Quebec, which can certainly be very symbolic in its own way. I think that could be something really interesting. Obviously, I think one of the big draws as well of Wanderers Ground is that it's so intimate. So they're so close. You can be so close to the players and to the field. Like there's a section right in front of the kitchen, and it's kind of like, the hoity-toity section of sorts, except for the fact that you're standing up the whole time. But like you're right there. There's really there's virtually no separation between the pitch and the spectators, and I think that helps as well. That kind of intimate nature of the stadium.
Mhm.
And I think
That's one
that
of my
is
favorite things
something.
about like British stadiums, that there's a lot of that
Yeah,
where like you are basically like 5 feet away from the field at
yeah,
the closest you are, which I just think is awesome.
yeah. And like
I
I
don't
know
know.
it's at Saputo,
In
like
like
they
a
have
perfect world.
those.
Yeah,
They have like the fancy tables and stuff. Like I know those exist, but
that's not the same.
I no, exactly. It's not the same. Um, exactly. So I think that is something as well that would be that I would recommend, especially because fans, even just looking at this season, how many sellouts Montreal had, despite not having a great record, despite dropping some real goose eggs at home, despite not necessarily fielding the most sexy lineup in all of MLS. Um, the fans showed out for them. And I think kind of having that proximity is something that would also be like a really good marketing for the team.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts, but
Let's
thank you for
get you
giving me
on the
some food
design
for thought
committee.
on that one.
Let's get you on the
Oh no,
design
it's a bad
committee
idea.
for the
I can't
renovations.
draw a straight line.
It's okay. You're just an idea guy. It's all right. You don't
I'll
have
just
to be
give him my
doing any drawing.
feelings.
Exactly.
Alrighty. Last tweet.
Last tweet. Yes. This is from Beaver Ball,
Beaver
which is again
ball.
another great name.
Yep.
Canadian soccer Twitter has some amazing names.
Yep.
I am not loving this version of Canadian men's national team's odds against Jamaica right now. We had the Canadian women's team get the job done against Jamaica to qualify for the
Mm-hmm.
Olympics. This is in response to a tweet outlining that Jamaica is like 70% chance
Yeah.
of being Canada's opponents in November for the Copa America qualifier. What's your takeaway, especially given that this match will be taking place in Toronto in November? What is your takeaway?
On
What do you think about, the odds? Do you share Beaver Ball's uh dread, dare I say, or
overwhelming.
maybe just caution towards this matchup? And what do you think would go well for Canada in a matchup like that?
So I think on paper, Canada should be all right. Um, you know, they've had the better of Jamaica the last quite a few times that the two teams have faced each other. So Jamaica is improving quite a lot overall. Like the players that they are bringing in from um even I think especially of the Premier League. They have Leon Bailey, who plays for Aston Villa, who's having a really, really good season. Bobby De Cordova-Reid, who's been super important for Fulham. Obviously, they have a bunch of MLS players as well who play, most notably, of course, Andre Blake, and who I think is probably the player who we all know. So they're doing a lot. Like, you know what I mean? They're up and coming, and I think if maybe they were a little bit further along in bringing over some of those dual nationals and some of those very, very high caliber players, it would be a little bit more of a threat. But I think right now they're still kind of early enough in that process, kind of where Canada was like maybe 5-ish years ago, that
Mm.
we're okay. um, Obviously, Canada is used to playing in cold weather. They've played some pretty chilly games, and I don't even think that that game in November is going to be the coldest game that they'll have played. I, you know, I agree with you that I don't think tactically Morabella is going to shake anything up just because of the competitive nature of this match and the importance behind it. And hopefully we will also have some of those players who are missing for this most recent friendly back. I think Steve Eustachio's presence is going to be phenomenally
So
important.
important.
I think Tajon Buchanan, he had a field day last time Canada faced Jamaica, and I hope he's fit for it as well, just as I hoped it earlier. So those are quite a few factors. I'm sure the Canadian public's going to show up. Canada tends to show up at home in front of their fans. So I kind of feel like those intangibles should align. That's kind of
Hopefully
my
they do.
thought.
I am in agreement with you. Yeah,
Okay.
Robbie asked, "Isn't it a home and home?" Yes, it is a home and home.
It is a home and home. You
Canada
are
has
correct.
the second leg. Canada has
Yeah.
the second leg, and
And
Robbie saying
Robbie
foolish
also has a
prediction:
fear of,
we win against Jamaica and qualify for Copa America. And so he is in agreement with the two of us. I think that um, Canada's not in the best place right now, but I do think
no.
that when the going gets tough, they will band together, especially if they need a result. I am always a fan of being, the home team for the second game when you absolutely need a result.
Well, you
So
know
I
what you
think that will
need.
definitely help them. Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think that'll be it'll be a crazy game again if they play
Yeah.
Jamaica. It'll be a crazy game on the road that first leg. But second game we hopefully another classic at BMO Field.
Yeah. Agree. Get her done. Just batten down the hatches in the first leg. Do what you got to do to
Exactly.
get through it, and then you know, show out and kind of
Oh,
reclaim
wow.
your position in CONCACAF in the second leg.
Absolutely.
Alrighty. So with that being said, that brings us to the end of our episode. It was a little bit of a short one this week, but just kind of an international break. That's kind of how these things go. So thank you so very much, Elias, for joining me on this Monday
Of course,
evening.
always.
Thank you to our listeners for your flexibility as we've kind of recorded on a couple of different nights lately. I'm going to say it, and I'm hoping it's going to be the case. But as always, please keep an eye on our social media, on our Twitter or X, if you will, should anything change. But we should be back with you Sunday evening, day after decision day at 7:30 p.m. As well. Just a couple of reminders and, of course, a couple of thank yous. So thanks to everybody who tuned in live with us this evening. Thanks to those of you as well who shared your comments and your questions and thoughts. Thanks as well to those of you who are going to listen throughout the week. We're always grateful for you as well. We do have a Patreon if you do wish to help support our podcast and help us grow our product. Of course, our content, regardless, is always going to remain free for everyone to listen to and to watch along with us if you choose to join us live. So, with that being said, have a wonderful week, and we will see you next Sunday for another episode of The Ball is Round.